Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today we are taking on, well, a truly immense topic. The intersection of ancient Hindu prophecies and cosmology with modern empirical science and historical scrutiny.
The big one.
Yeah. Our mission is really to navigate this collision zone. We are not here to debate the merits of faith, let's be clear on that. But we want to extract some deep insights by asking, what happens when specific, measurable claims within religious texts are held up to the standard of, scientific evidence and historical fact?
Right. It's really a comparison of two very different frameworks of knowing you've got faith on one hand and evidence on the other.
Exactly.
And setting that foundation is, I think, crucial because the starting point for Hindu prophecy is inherently different from, say, Abrahamic systems.
How so?
Well, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, they often rely on specific linear predictions. A definitive creation event, a straight line toward a final judgment, and a specific Messiah or Mahdi who will appear just once. Hindu cosmology, however, tends to view time and prophecy as fundamentally cyclical. The universe is created, destroyed, and recreated over these vast eons.
Right, these huge cycles.
So prophecies are therefore often descriptive of a recurring decline in spiritual understanding, making them highly symbolic and inherently flexible in how they're interpreted.
Okay, let's unpack the central eschatological idea first then. We probably have to start with the concept that defines the current age, the Kali Yuga.
The age of strife, yes. According to foundational texts like the Puranas, the Kali Yuga is the final and shortest of the four great world ages. It supposedly began roughly in 3102 BCE.
Wow, okay.
And is predicted to last 432,000 years.
Hey, that's a prediction that requires some serious patience. And the signs of this age, well, as detailed in our sources, they feel chillingly contemporary sometimes, don't they?
They really can.
We're talking about rulers becoming thieves, religious leaders, Brahmins neglecting their duties, the dominance of false doctrines, society venerating wealth alone.
Basically, yeah, widespread collapse of morality and even ecology, according to the texts.
And the climax of all this moral and spiritual decline is supposed to be the appearance of the final avatar of Vishnu, Kalki.
That's the one. He is prophesied to appear specifically in this sort of mythical place called Shambhala riding, a magnificent white horse, wielding a sword to utterly destroy the adharmic world.
Wait, let's just stop there and define that term. You said the adharmic world. What does adharmic actually mean in this context?
Good question. So, dharma is basically cosmic and moral order. It's the principle that upholds things. So, adharma is the opposite. It's chaos, unrighteousness, actions or conditions that work against those fundamental laws that sustain the universe.
Got it. So, Kalki is the principle of destruction, but aimed at restoring balance.
Exactly. Ushering in the new golden age, the Satya Yuga.
Right. Okay, now for the, let's say, historical scrutiny part. From a linear historical perspective, looking back, the prophecy seems to have demonstrably failed to be literally fulfilled. I mean, our world has certainly experienced periods that you could easily say match the descriptions of Kali Yuga strife. We've had world wars, genocides, vast moral failures.
Absolutely horrific periods.
Yet, the warrior on the white horse hasn't actually appeared.
And this is really the crux of the conflict, isn't it? If the prophecy is meant to be some kind of historical checklist, then yeah, it falls short. However, this is where the interpretive shift happens for many modern thinkers. People like Sri Aurobindo, for instance. They argue that interpreting Kalki literally kind of misses the point.
Okay, so how do they see it?
The Kalki avatar is seen less as a physical, sword-wielding figure on a horse, and more as the dawning principle of spiritual transformation within human consciousness itself.
So the end of the world is more like the end of ignorance.
Precisely. That's one influential modern take anyway.
Okay, so we've established that the prophecy can be, let's say, fluidly reinterpreted philosophically, but now we hit the bedrock. What happens when we apply a calculator and maybe a geologist's hammer to these claims? Yeah, here's where it gets really interesting, I think, because we find some sharp, measurable scientific conflict, particularly concerning the timeline of the universe itself.
Exactly. Let's talk cosmic scale for a second. Traditional Hindu cosmology places the total duration of one creation cycle, what they call a day of Brahma, or kalpa, at 4.32 billion years.
Okay, 4.32 billion. Now, this is truly fascinating when you compare it. The scientific consensus, derived from modern geology, radioactive decay analysis, astronomical observation, It fixes the age of the Earth at approximately 4.54 billion years.
Yeah, and the universe itself at about 13.8 billion.
Right, but that Earth age number.
The fact that an ancient, pre-scientific cosmology arrived at a number 4.32 billion, that is actually within about 5% of the modern scientific age of the Earth.
Yeah.
4.54 billion. That's intellectually stunning, you have to.
It is. It really is.
It was this incredibly powerful effort to grasp deep time that just dwarfs the timescales accepted by many contemporary ancient cultures.
It's definitely a wow moment, but it's also crucial to acknowledge the distinction, isn't it? It's remarkably close, yes, but still technically inaccurate by current measures. And maybe more importantly, it was derived, it seems, symbolically or philosophically, not through empirical, repeatable measurement.
Correct. It wasn't a prediction that science later verified. It was more like an approximation, a conceptual model that modern science later refined with different methods.
Okay. And the time discrepancy gets, well, much starker when we look at humanity's origins, right?
Oh, absolutely. The Puranas, these ancient texts, they imply or sometimes explicitly state that sophisticated Satya Yuga civilizations existed millions of years in the past, coexisting with life forms that, modern humans would recognize.
But hang on, how do we know the texts aren't just referring to some kind of pre-Homo sapiens civilization, one that maybe died out without a trace? What's the definitive archaeological gap that makes this claim seem impossible?
Well, the definitive gap really is the fossil record itself. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, like us, have only existed for about 300,000 years, give or take.
Okay.
And if we look for recognizable elements of what we call civilization, agriculture, cities, writing, complex tools, we only go back maybe 6,000 to 10,000 years.
So no ancient high-tech cities from millions of years ago?
There is simply no archaeological, geological, or fossil evidence anywhere on Earth to support the existence of global, sophisticated civilizations dating back millions of years.
Yeah.
Biological evolution itself contradicts it pretty strongly. The timeline just doesn't work.
Right. The timeline required for those myths simply doesn't align with the known history of life on Earth. Okay, but let's look at arguably the most testable and maybe the most ironically failed biological prophecy related to the current age.
I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah.
You're talking about the predicted lifespan during the Kali Yuga.
Exactly. Texts like the Bhagavata Purana are highly specific here, claiming that due to vice and environmental decay in this age of strife, human lifespan will progressively shorten.
To a maximum of only 50 years. It's quite explicit.
50 years. And the data, it tells a completely different and actually quite dramatic story, doesn't it?
It really does.
This specific prediction, unlike, say, the vague moral decline, was empirically falsifiable. You could actually measure it. And it seems it was tested by time and modern technology, and it failed spectacularly.
Indeed. We are supposedly living in the age of strife, the Kali Yuga. Yet, due to medical advances, sanitation, global organization, all sorts of things, global life expectancy hasn't shortened at all.
It's gone way up.
It has risen dramatically and is now well over 70 years globally and still climbing in many places. The irony is pretty profound, isn't it? The very age predicted for spiritual and physical decline is actually the age of the longest average lives humanity has ever experienced.
It feels like the ultimate example of medical technology kind of defeating a supernatural prophecy, in a way. If you accept the literal claim of the text, this looks like a clear empirical failure.
Well, believers, of course, might counter that the texts were describing the natural deterioration caused by vice and moral collapse.
It's not accounting for external massive interventions like, say, antibiotics in public health infrastructure. So it brings the debate back to, what counts as natural law versus human innovation disrupting that pattern.
That's a fair point on the interpretation. Okay, let's transition now to systems derived from the cosmology that are actively applied today, but seem to consistently fail when subject to empirical testing. I'm thinking specifically about astrology, or Jyotisha.
Right, Jyotisha. It's still a cornerstone of daily life for millions, claiming that the positions of the grahas, the planetary bodies, at the exact moment of your birth dictate your individual destiny, personality traits, future events, all of that.
Yet, when controlled, double-blind studies are done, where the astrologer doesn't know who the subject is, doesn't get any feedback, the predictions prove to be no more accurate than just pure chance.
And that's what the studies tend to show, yes. The scientific rebuttal usually hinges on two main points. The first one is just basic physical causality.
The mechanism problem. The gravitational or magnetic forces exerted by, say, Jupiter or Mars at the moment of your birth are astronomically incredibly minuscule.
Right.
They are utterly dwarfed by local forces like, the tidal pull of the coffee in your cup, or maybe more relevantly, the gravity of the attending nurse or doctor delivering the baby.
Yeah. Good point.
Science finds zero plausible causal link between those distant stellar positions and a newborn's character or future.
Okay, that's the physical argument. And the second point addresses why people feel it works so often. The psychological factor. We call it the Fora effect, right? Or the Barnum effect.
Exactly. And it's highly persuasive psychology. This is where you get these vague, generalized personality statements. Like, you have great creative potential, but you often struggle with self-doubt when pursuing your goals.
Sounds familiar.
Right. And the recipient interprets them as profoundly accurate and deeply personal. We naturally filter out the vague parts that don't fit and focus only on the elements that seem to resonate, convincing ourselves the system is valid.
We've all read a vague horoscope that felt eerily true at some point, haven't we? That's basically the Fora effect in action.
Pretty much.
Okay, so beyond systems like astrology, let's talk about some of the miraculous physical descriptions found within these texts' claims that seem, well, impossible based on physics as we understand it.
Ah, yes. These are the highly engaging, very visual stories that really capture the imagination.
Yeah.
But, yeah, they directly contradict things like gravity and conservation of mass.
Like what? Give us an example.
Well, think of the popular stories of Lord Krishna holding up the massive Govardhan mountain on just a single finger to shelter his people from rain.
Right, a whole mountain.
Or the great sage Agastya, who, according to legend, drank the entire ocean. All of it. To help the gods defeat some demons hidden beneath the waves.
Drinking the entire ocean. That's a staggering physical claim. I mean, the volume of water is almost incalculable, and it just violates every known law of physics regarding mass, volume, bodily capacity, everything.
Precisely. And let's not forget some of the ancient cosmological claims, which are still referenced in certain Puranic traditions, of a mythical Mount Meru. This mountain is described as being hundreds of thousands of miles high.
Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, functioning as the central pivot of a flat Earth cosmology in some interpretations. From a scientific perspective, these aren't really historical facts or even failed predictions. They're generally seen as clear examples of mythological or maybe proto-scientific understandings. Meaning attempts by ancient people to describe the world using the limited conceptual tools and observations available to them at the time.
Okay, which brings us neatly to the final section. This fundamental conflict that occurs when these ancient claims are judged by completely external interpretive lenses.
Yes. And we should probably start with the Abrahamic view, which, as we kind of noted earlier, operates on that fixed linear timeline. Creation to a single judgment day.
Right. So, since Christianity, Islam, and Judaism generally await a singular, non-cyclical, and a unique figure, whether it's the Messiah, the Second Coming of Christ, or the Mahdi, they tend to see the Hindu cyclical model and its associated theology as fundamentally incompatible with their own.
Exactly. They tend to dismiss the Kalki prophecy, partly because it stands in direct contradiction to their own awaited figures, but also, and maybe more crucially, to their theological understanding of the divine itself.
How so?
Well, take Islam, for example.
Yeah.
It's absolutely centered on Tawhid, the absolute oneness of God. The Hindu view, which is sometimes described as flexible monotheism or even polytheism by outsiders, where the divine manifests in multiple forms or avatars, that's often viewed traditionally as shirk or idolatry.
A serious theological error from their perspective.
A very serious deviation from the unified truth, yes. Now, historically, some Islamic scholars viewed Hindu texts as perhaps containing remnants of truth, but believed they were corrupted over time by later interpretations and polytheistic ideas.
Okay, so that's one external lens. Then you have the more modern historical and skeptical perspective, which focuses entirely on the text's verifiable integrity as a historical document.
Right. And skeptics are quick to point out that the vagueness of many Kali Yuga characteristics, the ubiquitous rise in quarrels, corruption, greed, is completely unfalsifiable.
You could say that about almost any era.
Exactly. You can apply that description pretty convincingly to the Roman Empire, the Middle Ages, or the 21st century. It functions more like a persistent moral framework, maybe a warning, rather than a specific testable prediction.
And more damningly, perhaps, historians note that specific, highly detailed predictions about actual rulers, dates, or historical events, which are sometimes found in texts like the Bhavishya Purana, well, they were likely not original to the text.
No, these are almost certainly interpolations. That's the technical term.
Meaning forgeries, added later.
Essentially, yes. Forgeries added centuries after the supposed events they predict. to give the text prophetic authority or credibility. They often reflect contemporary anxieties or political needs of the time they were actually written or inserted.
Can you give an example?
Sure. For instance, some late-period descriptions of Kalki explicitly frame him as a destroyer of barbarians or specific foreign groups, which conveniently aligned with the political needs of local Hindu rulers who were facing foreign invasions around the time those particular passages were likely being copied and, well, modified.
I see. Politics shaping prophecy after the fact.
It certainly looks that way in some cases.
Okay, so bringing this all together, what does this all mean for us, trying to understand this? The central takeaway seems to be that the claim of failed prophecy hinges entirely on the analytical framework you choose to apply, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It really comes down to your methodology. If your methodology is the scientific method, focusing on empirical verification, then the data points to clear discrepancies, or failures if you want to use that word.
Yeah.
The timelines don't match geology or archaeology. The specific biological prediction about lifespan demonstrably failed, and the mythological descriptions violate fundamental physics.
Pretty clear cut from that perspective.
But if your framework is rooted in faith or philosophical inquiry, then that empirical evidence might be considered irrelevant or secondary at best.
Right.
The focus pivots entirely to the cultural, spiritual, and philosophical truths. Ideas like dharma, karma, moksha, liberation, that are conveyed through allegory and symbolism within these stories. The texts aren't read as scientific reports or history books, but as moral blueprints for living a righteous life.
So the most fruitful discussion isn't really about whether the text is true in a scientific sense, but maybe about what criteria you use for judging its truth. Is it scientific verification, or is it spiritual guidance and cultural meaning?
That's a much more nuanced way to approach it, I think.
Okay, let's end then with a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider. We saw that the scientific contradiction regarding lifespan, that the predicted maximum of 50 years was utterly blown away by modern medicine, resulting in a rise to 70-plus years, is a clear, specific, empirical failure of a literal prediction.
Hard to argue with the numbers there.
Yet, given that the much vaguer moral description of the Kali Yuga, the persistent rise in conflict, corruption, greed, is arguably always true to some degree for almost any age in recorded history.
It does seem like a constant human struggle.
Doesn't that description function perfectly well as an enduring, maybe even unfalsifiable moral framework? Something designed primarily to guide human behavior rather than predict a specific future event.
That's a really interesting way to frame it. Is its purpose moral guidance disguised as prophecy?
Exactly. So as you look at the source material for your next meeting, or maybe your own deep dive into historical texts or even current events, think about how often you or we might be confusing a powerful moral allegory, a story designed to shape behavior and values, for a literal historical fact or a scientific prediction. That distinction, that's something worth mulling over.
Definitely food for thought.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.